Hi, I'm Sharon Davis, and this little video is going to explain to you the basic concepts of how we read music. It's actually a lot like a graph that you might remember from learning maths. The high notes are higher up on the page and the low notes are lower down on the page. And then going right in the middle of the two is middle C, and that's the note that you're going to find pretty close to the center of the piano or keyboard or whatever you have. If you go to the right when you're reading music, that's what we use to represent time. So the very first notes that you play are going to be seen on the left of the page, and as you work across to the right, you subsequently be playing those notes, much like when you read words. But we need to know a bit more specifically how high or how low the notes are that we want to be playing, and that's what these 5 horizontal lines, we've got a set at the top and a set at the bottom, that's what their job is, so that we can be specific about which note. And then we also want to chunk time into manageable bits as well, so that's what those vertical lines are there. We call those bar lines, and the sections of music between them are called bars. Americans like to call them measures. That's a term that you'll also hear sometimes, but each little section there, we've got 4 bars in the example that you can see here. This is now starting to look a lot like musical notation that you might have seen. So there's a couple of symbols there at the beginning. The big curly bracket on the side, that means that these two lines of music are joined together and are to be played at the same time, and we call that the grand stave. So for piano players, that's what we would be looking at. The curly thing on the top one is called a treble clef, and that's a pretty familiar symbol even for people who aren't musicians that you would see to represent music. It actually also has another name, and its other name is the G clef. So as we already know, the ones that are written at the top of the page are the higher notes, and we would generally play those with our right hand. And that curly thing with the 2 dots at the bottom, that's called a bass clef, and it's also called F clef, and I'll show you why. That top one, the center curly part of it curls around the second line from the bottom, and that line is where we play the note G. So if you, in a second, just imagine that the loop at the top of the treble clef wasn't there, then that symbol kind of looks like a really fancy letter G. So it's kind of like, well, we've got 5 lines, but what do we want those 5 lines to represent? Let's stamp a G at the beginning of the line, and that means that the center of that G is going to be a G note. The bottom stave there, by the way, the 5 lines are called a stave or a staff. Both of those terms are correct. The bass clef at the bottom, if you imagine that those 2 little dots were instead horizontal lines, then you've got something that looks a bit like a really fancy letter F. And again, the second line from the top in bass clef is an F note. So again, it's like the idea of we've got our 5 lines, but what do we want them to represent? We're going to stamp a great big F at the beginning of the line, and that's going to show us that that's where F is. Another note that's really useful to memorise is middle C, and that actually sits between the treble clef and the bass clef staves. So you can see the middle C note there. It's actually got its own little line in the middle of it. That's called a ledger line, and you use that when you want a note that's either above or below the 5 lines of the stave. You just kind of draw another one, and it's called a ledger line. So you can see from this that middle C is actually the one and only note that looks identical if you're looking at it from a treble clef point of view or a bass clef point of view. And in this example, you would see that the top middle C that's written there you would play with your right hand, and the bottom middle C you would play with your left hand, but it's actually talking about the same note. Yeah. Something else that's useful about Cs that I didn't realise for many years is that they're actually symmetrical across the stave. So we can see our familiar middle C there that we've learnt from the previous slides. The next note above it on the treble clef there, second line from a second space from the top, that is also C. It's the next highest C on your piano. And the bottom note there that you see in the bass clef, that is also C. It's the C below middle C on your piano. So you can see that they look symmetrical there. One's the second space from the top and the other one's the second space from the bottom. And that's not all. The symmetry continues. These notes are also all C. We've got our familiar middle C. We've got treble and bass C that are above and below that. And then the next pair of Cs, which are so high and so low that they also need ledger lines, they need a pair of them. They're the next C, high and lower, treble, high and low C. So that's kind of what it looks like when you see music written. But in order for us to read music, we really want to be able to connect what they look like on the page to where to find them on the. What we really want to know is how to connect the music that we see written on the page to where to find them on the piano. So we already know that this first note on the left there is middle C. When we use the alphabet in music, we only use A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then those letters repeat. So as long as you know those letters of the alphabet, you don't even need to know the rest. You're actually good to go. We know that that first note is C, so the one immediately above it is going to be D. And the one following that is E. And after that is F. We already know this next note is G because we know that we're in treble clef, and that treble clef is like a G clef, and that note is G, which is on the second line from the bottom. And at this point, that's when we restart the musical alphabet again. We've got A and B following that, and we already know that this last note written here is C because we've remembered it from how those C's are symmetrical. So the reason I've coloured some of these in pink is they're the ones that if you remember them, the term that we use is called like landmark notes. If you remember a few of them, then you can just work out the rest by using the alphabet. If we want to keep going up the keyboard, it's going to look like this. I've repeated that initial C there, and then we would be following the alphabet up, C, D, E, F, G, and then starting again at A, B, C, and that last C is written there in pink as well as one of those initial ones that we learned. So if you want to see all of those notes together, this is what it's going to look like. Middle C on the left, we recognise that G on the second line from the bottom, and we recognise those other two C's. And you can work out all of the rest by going up or down the musical alphabet from a note that you already can recognise where it is. What about bass clef? A similar process is going to happen here. You can already see which ones are pink. That initial C, the F, because bass clef is also F clef, and middle C on the right there. And if we want to go down an octave, this is what it's going to look like. We've got that lower C on the left there with the two ledger lines. And here is 2 octaves of bass clef. So the process is going to be the same. As long as you can remember a few C's and a note that's going to help you from the clef, you can work out all of the rest. And this is what the entire thing looks like. The grand stave with 4 octaves of notes there, and you can see the colour-coded ones to help you figure out what's what. We don't expect you to memorise all of that all at once. It's something that will come with a bit of practice and over time, but as long as you understand the concepts of where to find the notes on the piano, that's going to help you heaps.